Hey everyone, Rogold here, and today I want to talk about Incursions, as they are a new yet returning piece of content that we are getting in The Division 2's Year 5 Season 2, which is not too far off now. So I thought it would be fun to discuss their history within the franchise a bit, cover how they worked in The Division 1, and go over what we know about their return to The Division 2, as well as how I see them fitting into the current endgame, as I do think it's going to do some cool things. So if you end up enjoying the video and want to keep up with all the latest in The Division 2, consider clicking that subscribe button, and let's get into this. Alright, Incursions. In the background, you're watching what is probably my favorite incursion from the original Division game, Dragon's Nest, and I'll talk a bit more about it in a moment, but let's go over what incursions have historically been in the franchise. In the Division 1, incursions were the game's premier endgame activity, basically the toughest PvE content in the game. They were 4-player match-makeable missions that featured new locations with far more complex mechanics and fight structures compared to any of the other main missions or content within the game. And this varied as time went on and more incursions were added to the game. The original one, Falcon Lost, was essentially a wave defense mission, with interspersed mechanics like synchronizing a turret deactivation to allow a teammate to plant a bomb on the back of an APC. Then came along Clear Sky, which brought things up just a notch by having a few more things to be moved around in place and NPC kills leading to more waves being spawned. Dragon's Nest then kicked it up another level, having essentially 2 boss fights. The first of which had an optional mechanic where synchronizing the killings of all 4 bosses would drastically reduce the number of reinforcements that spawn, making the encounter dramatically easier. And a final boss which would cover different portions of the room on fire, encouraging repositioning while also requiring synchronized button presses to advance the kill mechanic. And lastly, we had Stolen Signal, which much more closely resembled what a raid looks like in the Division 2, but of course tuned down so that 4 players could handle it, with things like needing a shield to cover teammates and advance through turret-filled hallways, a water-based arena where you had to periodically push forward and not get shocked, eliminating a target on a short timer before they would execute a hostage, coordinate different teammates to protect multiple hostages. It was definitely more advanced than the ones that had come before. And that progression of difficulty over time as they added more to the game was interesting to see, and we'll talk about what that might mean for the Division 2's incursion in a minute. But incursions fit really nicely into the Division's endgame, in my opinion. They offered a weekly exotic drop for completion, some had exclusive exotics tied to them, some exclusive outfits. They were just a really good activity that fit what the Division was, and attracted both more hardcore and more casual players alike. So that's a brief summary of what incursions were in the past, but what do we know about their return to the franchise? Like I said, the Division 2 has never received any incursions, raids kind of took their place, but it's now been announced that we are indeed getting one in Season 2, and it'll be the first new one that the franchise has seen in over 6 years. How wild is that? Here's what we do know. This new incursion will take place at the Murray Estate, which if you know anything about the Division's lore and world is pretty cool. They're one of the many fictional companies and brands that the IP has conceptualized over the years. Think of Kerman Coffee, Admiral Burger, one of those. And you can find their influence back in the Division 1, of course Division 2, even the Division Resurgence. They're that high-end clothing line brand that you can see in retail stores and things like that. And so for us to now be going to that family's estate is pretty neat. We also know that the Cleaners will be the enemy faction that we are facing, which for me personally is just extra levels of awesome. The Cleaners are my favorite faction, and Dragon's Nest was easily my favorite incursion from the original game, so that's a win-win. Plus, the final boss in that incursion was a fire truck converted to actually spit out fire, so I can't wait to see what they come up with here. And lastly, it has been confirmed that this incursion in the Division 2 will retain the mode's roots, meaning it will be a 4-player activity and will have full matchmaking functionalities. So that is what we know. Obviously, more is presumably going to be revealed in the coming weeks as we approach the Season 2 PTS and the launch itself. But given that we have this wealth of knowledge about incursions from the first game, I want to extrapolate on that a bit and talk about how I see this new one and ones in the future, if we ever get that, fitting into and contributing to the Division 2's endgame. The first thing being, I just think incursions are a smart way for them to go at this point in time. Now look, I'll be the first to say this, and I've said it before, I love the raids in the Division 2. They are easily one of, if not my favorite new addition that the sequel made. I think PvE across the board improved in the Division 2 over the original, and both Operation Dark Hours and Operation Iron Horse took that grade base and amplified it to the scale of 8 players, with new locations and complex mechanics that were both challenging but also retained that sense of realism that the Division world needs to have. and so I thoroughly enjoyed those activities over the years as someone who is a more hardcore and team-based player, but it is important to recognize that I am far from the only player or the only category of player that the game has. And the fact of the matter is that I don't think raids ever really reached the heights that they could have in this game. Now that is likely due to a variety of factors, the fact that we never got more of them, the fact that support for the game stopped for quite a while, the fact that they required 8 players instead of 4 or 6 like Destiny does them. There was just a lot, right? But given that these days the majority of raids' relevance from what I can tell comes from communities that help carry newer players through them, and believe me, I have the utmost respect for people who contribute their time to doing that. It is a wonderful thing. But as a newer player, if your only viable way to complete these activities is by getting carried through them by teams that do it 24/7, that's probably not the healthiest for the overall state of the game. And so that's why I think the shift to incursions just makes way more sense, right? They essentially fill the same role, a hardcore endgame experience, except they're 4 players max, so way easier to get a group together for, and they have matchmaking, which assumedly implies that while they will certainly have mechanics, it's possible to do said mechanics without direct communication, though my guess is that it will still be difficult to do, which in my opinion, it should be difficult. Incursions are meant to be challenging. The difference is that it's not impossible to do without communication like the raids are in the game. Overall, I just think incursions fit the Division much better in terms of its player base, their tendencies, their support behind the game, etc., so I'm happy to see their return. And overall, I foresee them being a really great addition to the current endgame loop and structure that we have, because to travel back in time a bit, the Division's, final endgame, we'll call it, once 1.8 had released, it had a pretty solid loop. You had weekly based objectives in which every legendary mission and incursion in the game offered you an exotic cache upon completion, and then if you wanted that more replayable experience, you had several game modes to choose from. In current day Division 2, we've now got a lot of that replayability, right, with Summit, Countdown, Descent, but for those weekly objectives, you do have legendary missions, but the project only covers 1 a week, and you do have raids, except like we previously covered, those are all pretty hard to consistently run unless you're in one of those communities. But things like invasions have pretty much completely tapered off. We're in need of that week-to-week motivation to log in and complete something. So that's the role that I hope and am predicting incursions will fill, is that challenging weekly-based content for the entire endgame population. Every week, new project, complete the incursion for an exotic cache, some optimization materials, whatever it may be. Then you also do have the legendary mission project, we now have the Descent project, so that if you want more of those guided objectives, you've got them. And once you've done those, you've got a bunch of other more replayable content to do as well. That is my hope for how incursions will fit into the endgame. Of course, if it were up to me, I would put a new exclusive exotic behind it as well, but we'll see if they do that. More importantly than anything else, I am just excited for this new type of challenge. Dungeon and raid-like experiences are my favorite kinds of PvE content as someone who primarily plays a lot of PvP in Division and beyond. So I'm really looking forward to this new incursion, both because of those aforementioned facts like us fighting the cleaners, and from everything we've heard, the playtest results from this thing have been stellar, so I'm just super stoked to see it. And if the Division 2 is to get a year 6 after the new DLC drops in Season 4, I hope that we continue to see new incursions, build that roster up. Have us fight the Rikers on Rikers Island. Have us fight the Moravian Society of the Outcasts that was teased years ago. Have us fight the remainder of the Hyena Council. So many possibilities, but for now, I'm just looking forward to Season 2 dropping so that both older and newer players alike can get their hands on an incursion in the Division 2. That's all I've got for this one, guys. Let me know any and all of your thoughts on the subject below. If you played the Division 1, what's your thoughts about incursions returning to the franchise? Do you see this new one being different in any way? And if the concept of incursions is brand new to you, what's your impression of them based off of watching this video? Whatever you're thinking, leave it down below, and as always, I look forward to reading through your thoughts. And that's going to do it for me today, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Rogue Gold. Out.